Welcome back, MTG Joe here. Today we are going to be taking a look at the weekly meta breakdown for the Timeless Best of 3 traditional Timeless format. We got a new alchemy drop a couple days ago, so the data set locks are a little bit different. To be honest, there's really, I don't think, much in that set that's going to impact Timeless. The only card that's somewhat of a consideration is Jet Collector, the new 2-mana green creature that makes Mox Jet that has Reanimate on a stick. I tried it out in a Jund Death Shadow deck. There's a video up on my YouTube if you want to see. I think the card, you can play it in Timeless. I don't think it's busted. I don't think it's unplayable. I think it's a fine consideration option, kind of mixed into there. The other cards I don't think are powerful enough. There's a lot of interesting cards, but they have the Bowmaster problem, so basically unplayable. So we are going to take a look here. I'm going to go over 10 decks that are doing well. Normally we do popularity of the day from Untapped, what you see, but the meta is kind of skewed right now. It gets a little wonky when you have the new ladder reset. So it's just showing basically Dimir Control and Dimir Mill. But we will take a look at some community decks as well, like this one from Zhang, 91% win rate that they're killing it with. So we'll take a look at those as well. As always, we get the data from Untapped. The link for Untapped is in the video description. I'll timestamp and put all these deck lists into the video description so you can copy them to Arena to your heart's content. So jumping into it, we are going to look April 16th to May 7th. With the new set coming out on the 3rd, we have to wait 7 days to get unlocked. So there's not a huge amount. This gives us about a month worth of data, 21,000 games of best of 3. And we're going to start off with Rakdos Burn having the highest win rate. There's actually 2 Rakdos Burn decks that are doing fairly well. The main kind of difference between them is Eidolon of the Great Revels versus Slickshot Show Off. And I love Slickshot Show Off. I was playing the version, just getting some reps in best of 1. The deck goes fast with the Slickshot version. I found it a little clunky, to be honest. Eidolon comes down, puts pressure on your opponent. It's hard to take a turn off against some of the decks. While it can do a lot of damage, I just found it a little awkward that Eidolon, in at least this format, seemed a little bit better than the Slickshot. I tried Slickshot in Gruul Prowess and various other versions where you're pumping it a lot more. With this, you don't pump it as much because you're mostly just getting incidental non-creature pumps. So it doesn't do the huge burst damage like in Explorer, those formats, Pioneer, stuff like that. This version here, play with fires, no Ragavans, but you're using DRC Bauble package, which I think is correct. Playing the Sagas as well. Sagas enabling the Spectacle on Skewer and Light Stage. The one thing I didn't like about these lists, I don't think Raucous Theater is a burn card. Now, I know there's this whole notion, you fetch if you don't have anything to play. This deck really wants to kill by turn 3 or 4, or just put your opponent at such an insurmountable life total. Having a tap line at any point really screws up your curve. Being able to do multiple cards per turn, I would maybe think 1 I would try. I had 2 initially. I cut 1 because I basically had keepable hands that you had to mulligan because they just weren't doing anything because of this tap line. So I would trim 1, play Den of the Bugbear would be my kind of call on that. And then it wouldn't be unusual to see this be fully cut out in terms of just playing another Blood Crypt, for example. The sideboard, you have access to Fatal Push as removal. The Reanimate's interesting, I guess, for the more grindier matchups. Thoughtseize is Hand Hate, the other copy of Bowmaster, your full Roiling Vortex where needed, against Show and Tell or Control decks. Searing Blood for creature mirrors, and then Murderous Cut can deal to tracks on some of the bigger stuff. The Roiling Vortex, notably as well, there's going to be, we'll cover it in a sec, there's the Dimir Jace Valky combo. When they plot something, they take 5 damage. So that's another way to kind of get them with that deck there and kind of beat up on them. They have a harder time dealing with the enchantments. So there's that version of the deck, 83.9%. And then there's the Rakdos Burn with the Slickshot at 72. So you can see, it's pretty much the same stock list with the same sideboard. The only difference is a Slickshot Show Off. So we're counting this as one deck. It's basically just I want to show off the 2 variants of Rakdos Burn so you can see the difference in terms of win rates with the deck. The next deck is Dimir Control. So I will start off by prefacing, if you look at this stock Mistman Dimir Control, it's at 79%. So it is a little bit higher. That list, it's been the same list for a while now. But the list that you're probably going to be seeing a lot more of, just from a popularity standpoint, because it's the new cool thing to do. You'll either see Dimir. I've also run into Esper, basically splashing for Swords to Plowshare. You can play stuff like Dovin's Veto if you want. In the sideboard, Rest in Peace, stuff of that nature. But the core of the deck, you're using Jace Reawakened. So you can cast it on turn 4 onwards. You can then plot it, and then what you want to do is, those versions actually not even on Valky. It's just using Jace as a value card. That's actually interesting. So a lot of them do have Valky. I'm just kind of predisposed to think that this was the combo, but a couple copies of Jason here, just as card advantage, looting. You can plot. Notably, you don't necessarily want to plot your counter spells because it can only be cast as a sorcery, but plotting like Sorin's Ransom, a play that's happened to me a few times. Opponent will put Luris to hand and then plot Luris. So the following turn, they get to cast Luris for 0 mana, which is pretty value added. I could see very easily adding like 1 to 2 Valkyries or like Tybalts. It's a really tough to deal with engine once your opponent gets going. Just a ton of removal, counter spells, mana drain in here as well. Mana drain letting you get kind of pseudo discounted dig through times, also pretty impactful. Cut downs for just kind of more removal, various types of hand hates. Aether Gust helps against the more aggressive decks, red green decks, deals with like Blood Moon. And then just you can see just various types of removal. Filigree Silex in there can be used against you. We don't see much of it, but like Titan Field, stuff like that. And honestly, just the way the meta has been shifting, like Show and Tell has been really pushed out. We're not going to see a single copy like of Show and Tell kind of show up in these stats. People will still play it, but I think just between the shift of either heavy control with like permission or the more aggressive decks, it's kind of shifted the way they play. We then go to Grixis Tempo, Grixis Shadow. So there's kind of two versions of the Grixis decks. I prefer the, let's call it Grixis Splash Green for Deathrite Shaman. This version is Grixis Splash White. It's the more aggressive version. So this version has Scourge of the Skyclaves. It has Inti in it. It has the Regavans. The other version is leveraging more Deathrite Shaman, playing a little bit more of an interactive game. Has access to like Treasure Cruise, stuff of that nature. But the core of this deck, kind of manage your life total using Death Shadows as Scourge of the Skyclaves, Inti giving them trample. Otherwise, you have cheap disruption. Things like Lightning Bolt as removal, Thought Seizes, Spell Pierces kind of mixed in. This version splashing white for no main board cards, but in the sideboard you have things like Deafening Silence versus Storm decks, or even against, say, Show and Tell, Vanishing Verse against the monocolor decks. You have access to Lavinia, another hate piece, Fracture. So you just have some flexible cards that are mixed into here. Again, I think just doing cleaner with the Grixis version is fine. You could just load up on Roiling Vortex, Invasive Surgery, just various removal spells kind of mixed into there, but you can have a suite of options. The Alpine Moon probably isn't as needed anymore. The Field of the Dead matchups have largely kind of subsided. It's a little bit too slow in the meta right now, but an option you can keep in there. 4-color Yawg, 73%. We have basically stock lists. There's kind of two avenues. You can do Yawg combos for like value engines. The kind of core is two Young Wolves will loop each other because you can put the -1/1 counters, pair that with like a Blood Artist effect, and you can drain your opponent out, or with like life gain with Prosperous Innkeeper. Every time you put a -1/1 counter, you get snakes, so some value there. You can also turn 3 Natural Order in this deck thanks to your dorks into Traxa or Crater Hoof, kind of mixed into there. Again, sideboard, various kind of interaction pieces, removal, hand hate, protection against the blue-black decks. Pylon as basically a free removal spell in the deck. Test the Talents in here for the like Show and Tell matchups. Same with Lavinia, Tishana for activated abilities. They have like a single blue source, but you can also cord into these creatures for extra utility. Elven Chorus as like the grind piece of the deck. We then go to 5-color Midrange, 5-color Zoo. All in a midrange because you're a little bit more Planeswalker heavy. So this version's still on the 4 Regavans. I think Ragavan's in a pretty poor place in the format. It just dies to Bowmaster. It's a little like awkward at times. This one's playing a little bit more grindy elements, which I don't hate out of the deck because at times you can just run out of gas initially, but per latest iteration has some card advantage. We've seen sometimes Treasure Cruise get played. But the core is play undercosted, overstated creatures. 1 mana 3/3s, 2 mana 5/5s. This one's interesting because there's no Nashiba Brawler. And that's usually a card you'll see. I could see even trimming on some Regavans. You'll sometimes see Inti, you'll sometimes see Breakout in these decks, kind of mixed in, but a lot of burn in the deck. Oko in here, as well as Minskin Boo. And then your sideboard, just Relic for Graveyard Hates, Protection effects, more Bowmasters if your opponent's heavy on the draw, Reprieve for like the big mana combo decks, Terra Sunder's Flexible Removal, Licensors for Graveyard Hate, and then Oko for the grindier matchups. If your opponent's bringing in a lot of cheap removal, Oko, or even against aggressive decks, Oko just gaining life is pretty big. We then go to Rakdos Midrange. So this is a list that Missman's been playing a lot, 62%. So this is kind of a fair mid-range, but also kind of cheating deck. So you can get the nut draws of like turn 1 Dark Ritual, cycle one of your Oliphants or Trolls, and then reanimate it for value. You also have access to Blood Moon in the main board. Bowmasters, so it's kind of just grind them out. Shieldred, One Ring action kind of mixed into there. Seeing Break Expectations as a cheap discard effect. That doesn't necessarily hurt your life total, so kind of playing around the damage that you would take from Thoughtseize, since you're going to be taking a lot of damage through your reanimate style effects. Sideboard, you have access to Fatal Pushes, just kind of more interaction pieces, Ashiok for searching, also Graveyard Hate, you have some sweepers, and then Minskin Boo for the grindier matchups. You'll have access to a single Overgrown Tomb that you can fetch from Minskin Boo. Then we go to, they're calling it a 5-color Reanimator. It's basically Gruul's Sneak and Show. Actually, Jun's Sneak and Show. But kind of what you're doing, or Natural Order Show. Basically, Sneak Attack, Natural Order. Sneak and Show is Show and Tell. It's like usually a Grixis or Izzet version. But Sneak Attack can put into play like Atraxa, Galtas, or World Spine Worms. Natural Order can also find those cards. And you're just trying to maximize on early ramp. So Deathrite Shaman, Delighted Halfling, and Utopia Sprawl all can get you ahead on mana. And then any of your green targets let you then cheat into play either through the Natural Order or just kind of pump into one of these effects. So kind of cool that way there. You have access to just combo hate, like steal something from your graveyard. You have Veil of Summers for protection, Assassin's Trophy as another protection effect. A card that's not seeing play that I was trying out was Abrupt Decay. Another card I think is pretty effective in the format, just being able to deal uncounterable with any sort of cheap artifacts, enchantments kind of mixed in there. Legion's End as kind of sweet, cheaper removal for like Loris Piles. Vortex, Ashiok can usually come in against control, combo, graveyard kind of synergy decks. Dimir Mill actually had a pretty solid week, 59%. So this version here, only 2 Tashas on the Jaces. We see Murderous Cut in here, full set of Treasure Cruise mixed in, but a little bit more interactive version. You have the Orbs in here. Glimpse the Unthinkable is kind of big chunks, so like 10 cards. Every time they untap a bunch of cards, Jace can go 15 cards at a time. Archive Trap is 13, so you can do big chunks out of your opponent's library. Against decks like, say, Show and Tell, or decks that are relying on key combo pieces, you can pick out their win conditions. Even against, like, say, the Dimir decks, like the control decks, if we can hit a Bowmaster, that pretty much takes out their main win condition, which is kind of silly. They get them that way there. Activated abilities, cheap counters, just another surgical were important. Long Goodbye as uncounterable removal, some graveyard hate against the low CMC decks. Tasha takes out huge chunks, 20 plus cards at times. Path Peril is a cheap sweeper, and the Test of Talents for the more control decks. So then 2 community decks I want to showcase. So this one is from Zhang Zhilang's. They went 22-4, 85% win rate. And this is mono black Vampire Reanimator. So you have Trolls, you have Vein Rippers, Preachers, you have the Necropotents kind of combo. So basically just really leveraging the Dark Ritual package. You can turn 1 Reanimate, you could turn 1 Sorin to put into play Preacher or Vein Ripper. You could turn 1 Necropotents. There's a lot of flexibility with the deck. You have a Deathrite Shaman in here that give you the Overgrown Tomb package. And then you'll see a copy of Raucous Theater in here. Within the sideboard, you have access to like Duress, Marches, Surgical Extraction, Rolling Vortex for the combo matchups, and then Ashiok for any Surge or Graveyard decks. We see, are there any Marches main? So notably no Marches main, which is kind of interesting because that's usually one of the catch-up mechanics if you're relying heavily on like necropotents, because you can draw a bunch of cards, but the Marches do help. So interesting to see that they cut it out of the main in terms of that. And then the other deck to feature, this one is Esper Stoneblade, this one 3517. So Stoneblade is usually the reference to Stoneforge Mystic, and then Blades, various swords. So this one here, while not using necessarily the swords themselves, it has access to Cryptic Coat, recurable kind of card advantage, creature unblockable. You have Assimilation Aegis, kind of removal on an equipment, which is kind of cute. You get that kind of that value. Version's got access to like Dust Bowl to blow up lands, which is kind of cool. But otherwise, it's basically a blue-white splash black for some discard and Bowmaster. But you have like Leyline Bindings, you have Teferis in here, One Rings, Mana Drain, so just a bunch of permission that you can then use with the deck itself. Interesting to see Ketria Triome in there, just I guess for the Leyline Binding to get the cost reduction. Sideboard, just various removal options. You have Meddling Mage to name key cards, Leyline of Sanctity, protect against like discard, stuff of that nature. But kind of just a cool iteration of the deck. We haven't seen too much of the Stoneblade just because we're missing some of the key payoffs in terms of like Batterskull or Cauldron Complete. But interesting to see that folks are doing well with the deck. That's it for the week. Let me know what you've been playing, what you've been enjoying, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching.